actually will be my first time I've shared this much of my story publicly. So please allow me to read my story and use my art as a visual. I want to start with a promise that's been given to us. I'm going to plug my name into it, but as you hear it, I want you to plug your name in. Fear not, Lanie, for I have redeemed you. I have summoned you by name. You are mine. When you pass through the waters, I will be with you. And when you pass through the rivers, they will not sweep over you. When you walk through the fire, you will not be burned. The flames will not set you ablaze. For I am your Lord, your God, the Holy One of Israel, your Savior. Isaiah 43, 1-3. Brenna Brown, in her book, The Gift of Imperfection, which has been so helpful in my healing, writes, shame is basically the fear of being unlovable. It's the total opposite of owning our story and feeling worthy. She defines shame as the intensely painful feeling or experience of believing that we are flawed and therefore unworthy of love and belonging. It's already there, good. My full first name is Lanie. I was named from a song written in the late 60s by a guy named Donovan. Listen as I read some of the lyrics to you. When the sun goes to bed, that's your time to raise your head. That's your lot in life, Lanie. Can't blame you, Lanie. Can your part get much sadder? That's your lot in life, Lanie. Can't blame you, Lanie. Run your hand through your hair, paint your face with despair. That's your lot in life, Lanie. Can't blame you. Yep, I was named after a prostitute. Crazy, right? Well, you would think so, and Satan, sure as you know what, wanted me to believe every lyric from that song, and for a really long time I did. But what the enemy meant for evil, God meant for good. What I didn't know for the longest time, but now do, is that we have a bigger friend in God who is for us, who redeems us and restores us to wholeness. Many of the identities that I believed about myself began with this name and song. See, I am a second-generation survivor of sexual abuse and trafficking. So I believed that I was dirty, used, worthless, unwanted, and even worse, I honestly believed that I was incapable of being loved. Oddly enough, I wasn't one who wanted people to feel sorry for me. I honestly believed that there were just some people who were unlovable. It is just our lot in life. Satan used circumstances to validate these truths/lies. At the age of 2, almost 3, I was placed into foster care. My birth father was an abusive drunk and ended up in prison because of his choices. My mom returned to her life of drugs and the sex industry. Not even my own parents wanted me. I don't remember much from those first 5 years in foster care. I remember hating my life and even trying to kill myself at 6, but quickly learned that if you complained about it or acted out, you ended up in hospitals where they put you in rooms with really loud kids and lots of doctors who gave you medicine that would just make you sleep. I learned quickly that, Lanie, this is your lot in life. Put a pretty smile on and be good. The summer I was 7, my mom began to come and visit me in foster care. Visitations with my mom were worth the hose downs that I would get when I returned from visiting her. See, my foster lady believed that I had gotten fleas from my mom's dogs and was filthy, so before she'd let me bring in the filth and fleas, she would have me stand outside naked and hose me clean. My mom had divorced my birth father and told me that she was going to marry another man and get me out of foster care. By the end of that summer, that's exactly what she did. Finally, I was out of foster care and wanted by my mom. I had made myself a promise that I would not mess this up. I didn't want to return to foster care. I adored my mom, and I just wanted to belong. I wanted her to want me and love me. The first year as a family was wonderful. I got to ride bikes, play outside, dress up in amazing costumes that my mom had made, make friends, play with dogs, and just be a kid. The most amazing thing that happened to me that first year out of foster care was I gave my life to Jesus. We were at a Christian drive-in movie theater, and at the end of the movie, they gave an altar call, and I gave my life to Jesus there in our car. My life changed. I had a forever friend. I had never needed to be alone. Just stick this right here. My childhood began the summer I was 7 and ended the summer I was 8. We moved into a better neighborhood, and my mom needed to return to work. She had gotten certified as an upholsterer and did beautiful work, but found that the pay wasn't nearly as quick and easy as her previous work. She returned to strip dancing, drugs, and men. She would leave my stepfather to live for periods of time with different men, and I would go back and forth with her. This is when the sexual abuse, introduction to drugs, and exploitation began for me. Towards the end of my 3rd grade into 4th grade, my school bus was dropping me off at my mom's strip club. The shame I felt was weighty, and I felt responsible for it somehow. I didn't want my mom to feel any of the shame. I was very protective of her. I saw her as someone who was hurting and needed protection, and I wanted her to see herself as someone who was worth more than the looks I saw her getting from the men. She was worthy of being loved for who she was and not for what she did. I didn't want anyone to know that my mom worked there, and I didn't want them to see me going into the club either. I would get off the bus with my fake smile, and I would dash behind the building and wait for the bus to leave before I went inside. Inside, I was the favorite of the men. I was Peggy's special little girl, a pretty little girl, loved and doted on, for a lack of better words. I would dress up like my mom and do the different acts or dances that I saw the other ladies do or that the men would ask me to do. In return, I got to sit on laps, have whatever I wanted from the kitchen, and told over and over that I was loved. I thought all this was normal. In the beginning, I remember feeling dirty and bad, but I didn't want to rock the boat and get in trouble and possibly be taken from my mom. I don't believe my mom ever knew this was going on. I knew darn well that if she did, someone would be dead, and I didn't want any part of that. Because I believed the lie that I was worthless and dirty, I never said anything to anyone. I just became numb and was able to pretend, disassociate from it all. This is where I learned that love was not safe or good, and that being pretty only produced unwanted things. I would get breaks from this life, and my mom would abandon me for periods of time, only to be sexually abused by the men and kids from the neighborhood where my stepfather lived. I got to where I was afraid to sleep, not knowing what would happen to me, or afraid of the nightmares when I did fall asleep. By Mother's Day, 1983, I was back with my mom. I shared a room with my mom that only had enough space in it for a twin bed and a small path to the door if you walked sideways. By this point, I was 11 years old and had began taking care of myself and my mom since I was 9, and pretty much came and went as I wanted. It was normal for me to go to bed alone, and my mom would join me around 3 a.m. after the clubs had closed. This Mother's Day night, like many nights before, my mom came to bed with a man and I was kicked to the floor. I'm not sure what had gotten into me, but I said something like, "Mom, it's Mother's Day. I was hoping it could just be the two of us." That was not the right thing to say to a drunk mom wanting to impress this man. I returned from church that day with my cousin to find all my stuff at the end of the driveway. My mom had kicked me out. What was I supposed to do? My stepfather wouldn't take me. I was not old enough to get a job. I had nowhere to go except the streets. I began to cry, which was not something I did a whole lot of, and my cousin had pity on me. She allowed me to stay at her house, but only until foster care would find me a placement. Within a few months, I was back in foster care. I was placed with a Christian family who cared for me, who wanted me, and who told me over and over that they loved me. The only problem was I had a belief that I was not lovable. So you can imagine how difficult this was for me and how difficult I made it for them. I came to them with all my emotional baggage and my "I don't need anyone, I can take care of myself" attitude. After some time, I began to let my guard down and found myself enjoying the feeling of family, only to go to bed with nightmares that would not let me forget that I was unwanted, unlovable, and worthless. I spent my teenage years there and grew in my relationship with God. During this whole time, I fell more and more in love with God and His Word. I didn't think much about my previous life or the abuse at the time. It's amazing how God makes the mind to help you survive trauma. As I learned more about God, I wanted everyone to know about God and His love for them. The sad thing is, this whole time, shame kept me from believing that I was lovable. I believed that God's love for me stopped at saving me and keeping me from hell. I didn't believe that he had enough love to go around. Around the age of 16, my foster family took in a young man in his late 20s who needed a place to stay. He was a polite guy who was kind and just down on his luck. It was a matter of months before he began to come into my room at night and began to sexually abuse and eventually rape me. I laid there paralyzed, unable to scream or move. It was happening all over again. This went on for a while until I got the nerve to tell my foster family that he was coming in late at night to talk to me. Of course, he denied it because he actually wasn't coming in to talk to me. He stopped coming in for a season. Sadly, though, the abuse began again, and when it did, it was much more frequent. One evening, my foster sister came in to sleep with me, and in butt naked he walked. The next morning, he was gone, not another word to be said about it. My behavior became rebellious and unruly to the point I moved out on my own at the age of 17. The abuse had finally ended. I had survived. I was finally free from the sexual abuse, but I was far from free. My slavery now was not from circumstances. It was from a slavery that I kept myself in because of my belief about myself. In my effort to hide my story, I had to keep trying to be someone I was not. I would look around and see people who I thought had it together, and I would do what they did, but yet I still was not enough. I hated myself all the more. It wasn't until my final attempt to take my life about 5 years ago that I couldn't keep the silence. It was killing me. I had a group of friends who intervened and prayed over me to set me free from my desire to kill myself. Praise God, I haven't had those suicidal thoughts since. I began to lean into the light of God's truth. I began to go to counseling, started to tear down my protective walls where they were no longer needed, explored things I enjoyed, began doing art, learned what self-care was, and started applying it. And most importantly, I became brave enough to allow myself to feel. The first feeling I allowed myself to feel was love. With the faith the size of a mustard seed, I began to believe God. During this period of my healing, Andy, my husband, and I went to Florida. They had just had a storm, so we decided to go to the shore to collect shells. I was taking my time and Andy began to walk ahead. I picked up a beautiful broken piece of a conch shell and started this conversation with God. I said, God, this is exactly what you're doing with me. You're taking something broken and making it beautiful. Very clearly, I heard him say, no, I'm not. You're already beautiful, and I'm going to make you whole. Typical to our conversations, I began to convince him how good of an idea this was and that I, in fact, was right. So I said, fine. If you're going to make me whole, then let me find a whole conch shell. I figured that I had him on this one because in the 30 years that I had lived on the beach, I had never found a whole conch shell. I started finding bigger pieces of shells, and I said, yes, they're getting bigger, but they're not whole. I walked a little further up the shore and heard Andy say, Lanie, look what I found. He had in his arms like this, and in his arms, he had more whole conch shells than his arms could hold. I looked at him and just began to cry. I explained to him what had happened, and he said, if you think this is something, look down the beach. And down the beach, the entire shore was covered with whole conch shells. God spoke to me and said, Lanie, I have enough love to go around, more than you can contain, and I'm going to make you whole. And that's exactly what he's been doing ever since. And here's the part of the story that I love to tell the most. As I began to allow God to heal the hurts of my past and believe what he says about me, I started experiencing freedom for the very first time in my 30-plus years of life. Free to be Lanie without the masks, and now I believe that not only am I lovable, but that the creator of the universe thinks about me. He thought of me before he even created the earth, and even in my mother's womb, he was whispering that I was his little girl. When my mother and father abandoned me, he held me and still holds me close. I was never left alone. It's impossible for him to leave me because I am his and he is mine. Another belief change that I had was Jesus didn't have to die for me, But because of his love for me, he wrote my name on the palm of his hand and chose to die for me. And every day since then, he actually prays for me and speaks my name to our Father. I can stand before you today okay with who I am and who I'm becoming. I no longer have to fear because I have been redeemed, called by name, Lanie. I am his. Jesus bore my shame so I don't have to. When I work through my emotions and they seem more than I can handle, or I have triggers that make me feel afraid, I now know that those emotions are meant to be felt and that they will not consume me. God's promises are true, and they are for me and you. This is what Jesus did when he was sent to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim freedom for the captives and release from darkness for prisoners, to comfort all who mourn. He relates to me and you and allows us the amazing honor to proclaim these truths and promises to others. God over the years has brought many ladies into my life and to speak these truths to. 20 years ago, God restored my relationship with my mom. And 15 years ago, I was able to go back to Florida and help my mom be set free from sex industry life. Today, I know without a doubt what my purpose is. I'm the president and founder of Redeeming Joy, a home that is a safe place to heal for women who've been sexually abused and trafficked. I wake up every day with a gratefulness to God that he allowed me to go through what I did, that he didn't and doesn't waste a single moment of my life. Because of it, I can sit with the ladies that I get the privilege to live life with and say, I can relate. I can tell you that you too can be set free. You are enough. There's nothing you or I can do that will ever separate us from the love of our Father. No matter what I do or don't do, that truth will never change. Shout for joy because our God redeems.